This week, Avanti uncovered Juniper disclosure, identifying exploits and prioritizing network edge vulnerabilities and remediation, Linux memory forensics, and the latest Cisco SD-WAN vulnerability. Stay tuned. Below the Surface coming up next. Welcome to Below the Surface. This is episode number 69, being recorded on Friday, February 27th, 2026. I'm your host, Paul Asadoorian, joined by Mr. Vlad Babkin. Vlad, welcome.
Hello.
And our very special guest for this episode, no stranger to podcasting, Mr. Adrian Sanabria. Adrian, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Nice to be here. I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah, it's good to have you, man. We were chatting, and I was like, hey, I'm doing a podcast on this topic. And Adrian's like, oh, yeah. We talked about, you talk about a wide array of topics on Enterprise Security Weekly. So,
Yeah.
It's good to have you. Let's see. So before we get started, Below the Surface listeners can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting eclipsium.com/go. There you'll find the ultimate guide to supply chain security, an on-demand webinar I presented called Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risk, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing the product in action, you can sign up for a demo at eclipsium.com/go. What was I gonna say? Oh, webcast. We did. It was interesting. We did a webcast called "Firewalls on Fire," and realized that the first part of that title, overlapped with a DEF CON presentation from either the last year or two, and so we heard from the author of that DEF CON presentation. So, in
It's a
the
good
top,
title.
yeah, it's a great title, and I apologize again for the name collision. But go check out that person's "Firewalls on Fire" DEF CON presentation, as it covers the same stuff. And some of what we're going to talk about today is the continuing problems that we have with network edge devices, which just, it blows me away that we're still here talking about it, but somewhat also not surprised that we're still talking about it, because this trend, I think, is still on the upswing in my mind. Adrian, I want to get your thoughts in general on the just general trend of attackers going after these network edge devices.
Yeah, on the one hand, I do have a blog post where I kind of talk about this. I refer to the asbestos of IT, which all these file transfer servers, FTP, VPN, like old school IPsec and SSL
Yep.
VPN exposed to the public internet. Like, we don't have to expose all that attack surface in 2026. We have stuff like Tailscale. We've got
I
WireGuard,
love Tailscale,
um,
dude. It's so awesome.
ZTNA technologies that allow us to access remote resources without exposing TCP services or UDP services to the public internet,
Right.
which is how most of this happens. Most of these edge vulnerabilities we see, and I don't know SD-WAN a little bit. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand whether or not that is absolutely necessary to expose to the public internet, because it looks like an authentication, an issue in the authentication system that is exploited there. But generally, I think there's a lot of work we can do to just re-architect to remove a lot of attack surface.
Yeah, agreed. We've touched on that before, Adrian, and I'm just puzzled as to why enterprises are still kind of stuck on these somewhat legacy VPN models. If you read the Bloomberg article on Avanti, it covers some of that history, right?
Yeah,
So go ahead, Vlad.
I can add a little bit of oil into the fire actually.
Mm.
If you take a look at like modern devices, like one example is Microtics that I use for my home network, and it's not that hard to configure them to not expose anything but the OpenVPN. Like Microtik actually can run OpenVPN server on top of it, or WireGuard, or whatever, like both of them. And in this case, if you configure it correctly, like firewall it off and everything nicely, the only port that you will expose to the public is literal OpenVPN and whatever you want to expose to the public, like maybe forward some service inside of the network. So certain devices, like which probably are not very enterprisey, already even have a solution to this. So an insistence of enterprises of using stuff that literally exposes management interfaces is strange to me.
Yeah.
And
I'm somewhat
I think
ignorant to exactly how Tailscale works, but because you don't have to expose a port to the internet. But Adrian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the other factor here is that these all tend to be legacy products where their
Hmm.
code base has existed for 10, 20 years in some cases, that are not really receiving a lot of quality of life updates, just a bare minimum to be able to keep selling them. And as we see from the Bloomberg article about Avanti here, they're not even interested in doing that. They're not even
No.
interested in going after the security issues and fixing them. They're kind of just letting whatever's going to happen.
Yeah. Well,
So maybe avoid some of those vendors and products as well, right?
yeah, for sure. So there is a Bloomberg article. I do want to state, and I talked about it on my other podcast too. Bloomberg wants to charge like $2 a month, which would be fine, except I need to read a Bloomberg article like maybe once or
Once a
twice a
year.
year. Yeah, right. Like if they had a cybersecurity section and it was at least somewhat, if it was value wise worth $2 a month, 100%, I would subscribe for
So
$2 a
I,
month, right?
I recently found, believe it or not, I got a new library card for the first time in 40 years.
Mm.
And you can access a lot of magazine subscriptions with a library card
Oh, interesting.
without
Hmm.
having to pay for them. Yeah. Yeah. They have like an app
But
you can put on your phone. I
yeah,
forget the name of the app, but
I mean, I don't want to take away
Wow.
from like I understand why they want to charge $2 a month. And look, I would rather have you charge $2 a month than try and do some like crazy advertising thing that, from cybersecurity standpoint, is somewhat risky. So I appreciate it. I get it. Everyone's got to make a living, but the audience, like when you put together one really good, or once or twice a year, a really good cybersecurity article, well, I can't
it,
justify it.
it's called Press Reader is the name
Okay.
of the app.
Yep. Impress
And you
Reader
just plug,
requires your library card number or whatever.
yeah, you just plug in your what library it is and your library card number, and boom, you can read. Like that's The Economist right there, which is a really expensive
Oh yeah.
subscription.
I used to subscribe to
Uh,
The Economist. Yeah, it was I haven't read that in a long time.
yeah, yeah. So that's a hot tip. Like you
Right.
can get a library card
And of
for
course,
free,
like I don't like we're
and
hackers, and it's not like it's
yeah,
public knowledge how to get around paywalls. Like it's not, even most LLMs will tell you some ways to get around paywalls. And so no knock to Bloomberg, but I really wanted to read the article, and I wasn't the target market for the subscription. So in any case, I'm reading the article. And it's a really good article, though. Bloomberg interviewed, seemed like a pretty large number of ex-employees of Avanti and of Pulse
yeah.
Secure, right? Because that was, I forget how Avanti was created. Did Avanti ever have their own software, or were they just a company that was created to
No,
acquire other companies?
yeah, yeah. So they were a combination. It was just a new name they gave because it was Heat Software and
Hmm.
Shavlik and like
Oh,
all
it
these
was
different
Shavlik,
companies.
the patch. Is that what
Yeah,
their EPM is? That's Shavlik.
yeah, mhm.
Okay, that makes sense. It makes sense
Yeah.
there
It
there's
was
nothing truly new. Then when I hear these things and I talk about it, I'm like, "What's a Vonti EPM?" If someone had just told me, "By the way, that's Shavlik," it would have saved me a lot of reading. 'Cause I'm like, "Oh, I know what that product does." I'm
Yeah,
just
I
old.
just happened to be an industry analyst when all that was happening, so
Yeah,
I covered a lot of that. I wrote up a lot of
right.
the uh, that merger and acquisition.
So Avanti's really just the shell company, if you will, and it acquired Mobile Iron, for older cybersecurity folks like us, we recognize those names. And it acquired Pulse Secure.
Yeah.
And then rebranded it to Connect Secure.
Mhm.
So you get this really confusing naming thing where you're like, wait, what is this VPN? Is it Avanti? Is it Connect Secure? Or is it Pulse Secure? Today, it's Avanti Connect Secure is the product. You can run it as a virtual appliance or a hardware appliance. And then again, they have other offerings. But it is the Pulse Secure Connect Secure line that this article is focused on. Do they touch on Mobile Iron a little bit in here? I'm not sure. They look like they're primarily focused on the Pulse Secure Connect Secure line, and it really shed light as to why we've got some of the problems that we have. If you believe, I mean, some people are skeptical. Some people are like, well, this article's overblown. It's not really, Avanti tried to do some hand waving. And I think some other analysts were like, it's not as bad as that Bloomberg article painted it out to be, but they do make a pretty compelling case. Vlad, Adrian, I don't know if you got a chance to read this article, but I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I mean, 119 organizations breached. Like there's a handful. I can count on one hand the number of companies whose products got over 100 companies breached because of one vulnerability. Right? There's like
And that
Move It
was the supply
DMZ.
chain. That was the supply chain breach, right?
Mhm.
Where the was it Russian threat actors breached Pulse Secure in like 2021, backdoored the product, and it shipped to 119 customers. I think we knew that, but we didn't know how many customers, right?
Yeah, it's huge. This is huge. It's Move It DMZ hit a lot, and yeah, it's not just once though, right? Like it just keeps happening.
And then they have other
With
vulnerabilities that get exploited by threat actors.
with this,
100%.
and the one thing that this article doesn't drop in there is the fact that Avanti was one of the signers of the Secure by Design CISA pledge back in 2023,
Right.
right in between all this stuff. And
Yeah.
we do have some inside knowledge here from the former CISO of Avanti saying, there was no effort to fix any of this stuff.
Yeah. So we have first/second hand accounts, however you want to count them, of that kind of thing happening, which is telling. But what was even more, I think, like important and carried a lot of weight was the not just number of customers that they lost, but the who those customers were. So basically, at one time, like we had pre-pandemic, then pandemic hit, and everyone went out and bought VPNs, and VPN spending was on
Yeah.
the rise during the pandemic. Then, as the pandemic kind of waned down, that people started ditching their VPNs, and also it should be important from a business standpoint at that time. Avanti made that decision to go from you buy it and pay us up front to a subscription model,
Yeah.
which further hurt them right, financially. There's some numbers in there financially that are just astonishing.
Yeah, they went from like 300 million in revenue on this product to 150 million in revenue in like 18 months. Even the
Correct.
U.S. government was saying there's no other advice we can give than stop using this product,
And they did,
which is rare.
and they lost Navy, Air Force, um, Army, and several private companies. It's here in the article. I'm trying to find it. But they lost like a huge amount of DoD customers and a huge amount of private
Yeah,
companies. And
So
it's just funny. I remember talking to a CISO, and I'm not saying that this is the case because you can go look it up in the PSW archives, but we were having this conversation, and he kind of hinted towards on live on the air that we're making decisions to get rid of technology based on security incidents. And now my guess is he was referring to Avanti after this article came out. And again, that's just speculation on my point.
yeah, and there's some stats out there. It looks like most people jump to Palo Alto. Like something like
Yeah,
70% of all VPN use is
it
what
is
do
the
they call it?
Global Protect. Yeah, the
Global Protect.
latest
Yeah,
Gray Noise report, Global Protect
that's where it
was
came from.
huge. Yeah, huge in numbers on that. Sorry, Vlad, you were
it's
trying to say
it's
something.
it's 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 not even that surprising. Like you're running a cybersecurity company. I'm not speaking just about Avanti. Like it's just every one of them. If you refuse to fix vulnerabilities in your product over years and years and years, and they keep piling up, and people start talking, oh hey, there is no effort to fix them inside your company. Well, it's gonna eventually translate into a huge reputational hit, after which just
Yeah.
lose customers. Because like de facto, all of the VPN companies, like they use WireGuard, OpenVPN, maybe, and it's literally just 2-3 protocols in play. And in general, nobody of them invented anything radically new. Like I don't know about Tailscale in this case specifically, but most of the appliance-based stuff is literally OpenVPN nicely bundled in a box, right?
Yeah. And some
So
other weird VPN binaries that I haven't gone back and looked at the lineage of them. I think it would be an interesting study. But in a lot of these
yeah,
network edge appliances are so you've got Avanti, Fortinet, Palo Alto, and Cisco. You can trace back the buffer overflow vulnerabilities right? Since they're Linux under the covers, to a Linux service that's listening on typically the default port of 8443. And typically that's like /sbin /SSL and it's that binary that contains the memory corruption flaws that have been, when that's just one class obviously of bugs that we have in there. It's perhaps, I don't want to say it's the most detrimental, um because it's memory corruption. You keep in mind, you have to tune your exploit to your target, so these devices can be run as virtual appliances on x86, so you need a specific kind of exploit for that. They can also be targeted at a physical appliance, but those physical appliances, as is the case in Fortinet, they're ARM32. And then I think like newer models are ARM64. So you take all those three platforms as an attacker. If I'm going after memory corruption and I need a ROP chain, I need to execute a payload, it has to be tuned for that platform, right? And tuned
That's
for
it.
that version that is installed on that platform. So if you've looked at, and I'm not picking on Fortinet, I just happened to look into it. They've got a lot of different versions of FortiOS. Like, right? There's, I think, version 5, 6, 7, and I don't know if they've gone to 8 yet, but 7 and 6 and 7 are some of their major versions that are still supported, even in 6. But there's a lot of different versions of them. And if that binary changed in between those versions, you have to adjust your exploit for that version that's running either on x86 or ARM32 or ARM64. So you have those problems. But keep in mind, a memory corruption exploit gives you code execution on that Linux layer, which is it's super useful for attackers, right? Then what I notice threat actors doing is they'll go into the bootloader on those devices and maintain persistence, right? They'll somehow embed themselves either through symlinks in different partitions or right in the bootloader, like on Ramon, on Cisco FTD devices, they'll actually infect the bootloader. And I'm not just saying like that's a thing and it's possible. That's based on, I've looked at the vulnerability in Fortinet, which threat actors have used it, how have they used that, how have people observed those threat actors doing it, and that's where that information comes from, which is actually, it's so much fun. I'm like overwhelmed because you can do this for all the major platforms. You take the major vulnerability and then you go start tracking threat actors, and it's just then you start drawing parallels to what they're doing, and they're basically all using this as jumping off points to collect credentials and conduct operations. It's C2 infrastructure as well. Vlad, go ahead.
Massive case in point, all of the added value for these devices does not come from VPN features itself. It comes from all of the added services on top of the binaries
Yes,
they just keep reusing.
I agree.
And like, if you suddenly stop providing that added value, bye bye,
Why not
company.
just use right?
If you just needed one device, right? Like you're an individual or even a small company, you need one device. You could use Tailscale, stand up a pfSense, OpenSense, OpenWare,
Yeah.
and you'd be fine. The enterprise use case is they need tens, hundreds, thousands of these potentially deployed. So not only do I need something that can be deployed very reliably, but I need a management layer on top of that. And if you look at Palo Alto, Fortinet, and Cisco as example, their management platforms are also like huge beasts of software that help you manage all that infrastructure, which by the way, have also had vulnerabilities that are exploited by threat actors. So you just keep increasing your attack surface in this area in an effort to provide security for your company, which is crazy.
Yep. And in this case, like the real solution to this probably would be when somebody comes out with a service which allows to deploy all of this in Kubernetes containers and whatnot, and just containerize this OpenVPN without any extra interfaces, so that like it's managed with normal infrastructure as code kind of stuff.
Sure.
But that doesn't exist yet, in my
Yeah,
brain.
I know there's some and I think they're for like training purposes, but I know that when I looked at yesterday, I was looking at Juniper platforms. And it was like, how can I virtualize them? And they had one platform that it looked like it spun up a container, a Docker container, and inside the Docker container, it runs Linux KVM and virtualizes one of their platforms. And I was like, really? Like
Inside a Docker container?
inside a Docker container. And they said they did that to make it easier for people to deploy. They said our customers told us they wanted containerized stuff, so we made it deployable in a container. Those of us that are good with Linux or watch my technical segment on Wednesday know a little more about how to set up Linux KVM now. And I'm like, just give me a QCOW2 image and deploy it. I mean, that's what Cisco does. That's what Fortinet does, and a lot of other folks as well. And I mean, not so secretly, right? I'm building a lab. I want to be able to run the stuff. I want to be able to test this stuff. I want to be able to infect these things, watch that infection, and then develop ways to help detect that infection. So in an effort to help enterprises with visibility, because the mind-blowing thing, we talked about it in our webinar, right? The mind-blowing thing, I came to this point, I'm like, look, it's interesting how these vendors put out a platform and they're like, here's an appliance, virtual or physical. You get, as the customer, you get access to like the operating system layer, which for those more technical folk, right? Cisco iOS, Cisco FortiOS, like that's your interface to the device. Underneath is Linux. But many vendors are like, no, 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 no. You can't, as Mr. Customer, you can't go into that Linux layer because that would cause support issues or whatever, the reasons are, support being probably the number one. And cybersecurity companies like us are like, well, I want to give you, like, I had literally people on the webcast asking me, Paul, why can't we enable eBPF monitoring on the Linux subsystem on these enterprise appliances so that we can monitor what's happening in Linux? I'm like, you're making so much sense right now. It's a great, like, you're spot on. I'm like, but as cybersecurity companies, we don't have access to that layer either, unless we exploit a vulnerability. But we debate it all the time. We can't put an exploit in our product. It's not what we do, right? We can't be exploiting vulnerabilities to provide visibility. So cybersecurity companies are limited. So what does an attacker do? An attacker finds a buffer overflow, vulnerability, and exploit, and they live inside that Linux layer where the user and cybersecurity companies have limited visibility. And that's the frustrating thing.
It is not unheard of for customers to hack a vendor's product to make it more secure.
Yeah, I know it's happened, right? I get it. I know we've had the discussion many times here at Eclipsium. So, maybe someday. Who knows? I know it's not. It's an ongoing discussion too. It hasn't. We haven't closed the books on it, but yeah. So that makes it hard, right? I haven't looked into Avanti very deeply. I know that most of these are really just Linux underneath. When we talk about Cisco SD-WAN, that's just Linux underneath. And I was not familiar with the Cisco SD-WAN platform. And also SD-WAN is kind of this like weird catch-all term, I think, for slightly different technologies. But when it was NCSC, someone published, I put it in the show notes. Someone published a really great guide. Oh, it was like the Australian counterpart to CISA, maybe?
Yep.
Produced the Cisco SD-WAN Threat Hunt Guide. I was like, well, this is great. When you look through the Threat Hunt Guide, they've got you looking at things like /var log and looking at SSH configuration. So I'm like, this box is just Linux. I can tell from the hardening guide, this box is just Linux. So, but it looks like they might give you access to that Linux layer if the hunt guide is like, you need to go look at this file. So,
yeah. I mean, most Cisco devices, you do get some kind of CLI, but most of what I'm used to from most of my experience goes way back is iOS CLI, not Linux based. But
yeah, there was some juncture where everyone started building in Linux to the underlying layer, and I think that allowed them to virtualize the iOS and FortiOS operating systems, and there was a lot of benefits to doing it. I remember reading about it. I forget but there was like benefits to doing it that way and changing the architecture.
Just makes development cheaper.
Yeah.
And quicker.
Right.
Yeah. And like some of the Cisco products actually allow you access to underlying bash, like an XOS does, etc., etc. So
FTD does as well.
Yeah.
Which is super handy. Then we can provide better visibility, into those platforms. We do that in FTD. We can tell you, the Arcane Door campaign If you haven't looked at that, they targeted FTD devices, did some pretty amazing things with them, in terms of credential gathering. They had one of their line dancer or line runner payloads has a network sniffer and also can harvest credentials locally from the VPN appliance itself. So if you're not patching, but patching, this is interesting because Adrian and I have talked a lot about vulnerability management with each other in the past. The thing that gets me is if you're an organization that's relying on vulnerability management to solve this problem with your network edge devices, it's too late. The traditional way of doing vulnerability management is not really going to help this problem. We saw with the Cisco FTD, the most recent one, that Cisco came out and said threat actors have been exploiting this vulnerability since 2023.
2023. I have stats on this.
Right? And this is
So
not the only one. Yeah.
I'm putting together a blog post on this, but basically, I've been kind of obsessed for the last year about speed of exploitation. So the answer to the question, how fast do you have to be to fix your stuff before attackers can exploit it, can use it? And the answer is you can never be fast enough. So it kind of
Right.
shifts focus to like passive mitigations, to hardening, to things that generally make exploits harder to pull off or harder to leverage, or better detection on lateral movement. Because according to Mandiant, the average time to exploit in 2023 was 5 days, and then in 2024 it dropped to -1 days, which means the majority of active exploitation that we're seeing is before disclosure.
Yep.
These are 0 days, right?
There's
And in
several
this case,
sources that back up your statements, Adrian, 100%.
and this is exactly that case where now that we know what we're looking for, we can see it happening for 2 years already.
Yep. And so
So,
monitoring these devices is super important as well, because as we march
Yeah.
through the different classes of bugs,
Look for shady stuff.
authentication bypass is also big too. Now, that doesn't give them a Linux root shell, but authentication bypass can do a couple of things. One, it gives the attackers, threat actors, access to your firewall. And so what they'll do is if they can just bypass authentication, they'll set up an SSL VPN tunnel for themselves and put themselves on your internal network. And they really only need the authentication bypass to do that. And the nice part about the auth bypass is it's not dependent on architecture. It just works natively within the application,
yeah.
and you're just using it. Similarly, command injection might be the most damaging class of attacks on these devices because it is platform, CPU architecture agnostic, and gives the attacker not just the capabilities in your VPN, but also the capabilities to execute commands that could lead to a Linux, implant being deployed on the system. So the combination, of course, I've seen combinations of authentication bypass to command injection. The latest FTD demo that I built uses an authentication bypass exploit to find the URL endpoint that doesn't require authentication, and it just needs that to go to the next stage to do the buffer overflow exploit to gain a Linux shell on the device. So it's chaining these exploits together, which is hard for defenders, right? How do you assign a severity to multiple vulnerabilities now on any system
Yeah.
and specifically edge devices?
Yeah, there are practical cases where like 3 or 4 low to medium vulnerabilities when combined are becoming one critical one. And you cannot really do anything about it. And also there's another beautiful thing about like authentication bypassing these devices. You don't necessarily even need to make an SSL VPN tunnel. So like if your strategy is, oh, hey, I will just monitor if there are new SSL VPN tunnels, what the attacker can do is just open themselves a port that goes
Yeah.
into some internal service. And oh, hey, now I will monitor open ports. Okay, they can modify routing tables, and that's another surprise they can do. So there is a lot of stuff that they can do with configurations there, which you will never be able to detect and see.
Yeah. I mean, also if SSH is on the Linux system, that's another avenue that attackers could use as well.
Yeah, which is why I think deception is really interesting. Like put some fake SSH on there, put some fake
Right.
binaries on your system. stuff that you know the attacker is going to reach for immediately, that living off the land type of stuff. Yeah, make detection easy by putting fake stuff out there.
Yeah. This is a case I don't often recommend people go towards things like Canary tokens and honeypots. I mean, I love Canary tokens. I think you should have them, right? But do we now put Canary tokens on our network edge devices if we can? Like, do we develop
Absolutely.
custom ones? This is a
They're the
case where
ones getting hacked.
given the lack of visibility, you need anything that you can, reach out for to put on here to get some visibility. So yeah, I would do that. It'd be interesting. Like, I'd wonder how
So
you could do that inside like the FortiOS or iOS layer if you don't have
I
access to
got you.
Linux.
So if you have access to Bash or some kind of shell like that,
Mhm.
the way that I do it is I create wrappers for binaries. So I will create an alias that loads when you log in, use your Bash profile, your Bash RC,
Mhm.
and that alias will basically run a script that triggers a Canary token and then runs the actual binary. So
Mhm.
instead of and you can replace the actual binary with a Canary binary, but I find it much easier to just use an alias because nobody's going to look to see if they're being run through an alias first. And by pointing that alias at a script that you hide somewhere
Yep.
in the file system, everything looks normal when they run the command. Like there's no difference between the command running if it goes through an alias or doesn't go through an alias, because most of
Mhm.
these Canary tokens are just, uh, curl this HTTP or, trigger this DNS, do a
Oh,
lookup
I
on this
see.
DNS.
So in the script, you trigger the Canary token and then you just run the command that was aliased. Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally just a curl line,
Yeah.
and you hit that HTTP destination with curl or
Right.
wget or
And then hey,
whatever you have on the
an
box.
attacker ran this binary, or someone ran
Yeah.
the binary.
Well, and not only that, but you can use, so when I do this, when I write these scripts, you can grab information about them.
Mhm.
So like one of the things you can grab is the IP address that they're coming from. And you can use the user agent. Every time you touch a web server, there's a
Mhm.
user agent field, and you can use that to smuggle out all kinds of details like what account is it, what IP address are they coming from, like any
Oh,
details you
interesting. Yeah,
want,
yeah, yeah. Right,
you
right.
can put in that. So not only do you get an alert saying somebody just ran this command on this box, but you can also see what IP address that they SSH'd in from.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, we definitely see. I think we need this level of creativity to help defend this attack surface, because I don't think we're going to get anything better anytime soon, right? I mean, there is the if you follow the headlines, right? CrowdStrike partnered with F5 to do some stuff, but I haven't seen much else in the way of providing great visibility. I mean, other than when we do it at Eclipsium, we do some pretty amazing things to basically, we have to live off the land that's given to us, and we do some amazing things there too to give people visibility. And that's the level of creativity we're down to, because the vendors aren't going to give us more access. I don't see that happening. Do you
Yeah,
guys?
well, some vendors actually are cooperating well, like Cisco and XOS,
Hmm.
one example. But some vendors are just a nightmare. Like, oh, hey, customers will want a visibility in Palo Alto. Well, Palo Alto is a fully closed ecosystem. They're not giving you any kind of access. So the only access you can hope for, you cannot even get aliases. So you don't even get that. So there
Yeah.
is like a question how to monitor them, and like answer there is not easy. Not
Well, that's
simple at
the
all.
that's the and that should go into your build versus buy decision. When
Yep.
picking something up, is that our ability to detect attacks on this appliance are limited,
Hmm.
or you just need different strategies, maybe.
Yeah, it was very funny to me when I heard the news that cyber insurers actually increase the insurance cost when you use SSL VPN appliances. So
Oh,
that was
really?
very
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. Yeah, because that's now in their actuarial data. When they look at their actuarial data, they're saying, okay, like 30% of what we're paying out on start with these edge devices. So if you're gonna, again, the asbestos, that's why I call it asbestos, right?
Yes.
Like the industry knows it to be dangerous. there are alternatives. So as time goes on, you have less and less excuse to use it. You're going to get fined. You're going to pay more for insurance.
Yup. Because like it's not that hard to actually exploit your device, even though it looks like it should make exploitation harder, but no. It makes exploitation easier.
Right. And it makes hiding the way attackers are hiding on these platforms is I mean, they don't even have to be that stealthy because we don't have great visibility. So that's why they're there.
Can I share something real quick, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, so this is a blog post. I put it in the chat that I wrote up back when I worked at Thinkst.
Mm.
And you can do
Oh,
this.
that's right. You worked for Haroon at Things, which I
Yeah, I
love
did.
Haroon, the whole team and the company. You guys are great.
So this is just using an HTTP token, which is pretty easy to use. Thinkst is not the only one with these tokens. There's a couple of vendors now that you can go with. Of course, they do have free ones at canarytokens.org if you just want to play around with this. And so, yeah, it's really important to have the token reminder. I think this is the biggest mistake I see people make is they try to create a single token and then put it on their whole production infrastructure. But then when you get an alert, you don't know where it's coming from unless
You don't know which host it came
Yeah.
from. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta capture that host name. But here's where I'm using the user agent, and basically I forget the command switch, but with curl or wget, there is a switch you can use to put whatever text you want into the user agent. And
Yep.
this is where I use these variables, these system variables, to capture the command that they used, the username that they used, the on which host, and then the source IP address that they were coming from. So there you go. You get a lot of useful information to start your investigation.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, more stuff to
And
consider. Yeah, to protect
this
this
is
stuff.
just Netcat I was using as the example here. And so it's
That's great.
all in a little netcat.sh, probably 2 lines, 3 lines long. I think I have it in a gist somewhere.
Mm. And you can have your own infrastructure, like open source, right? Like you can do it all yourself with the Canary tokens.
Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is open source. They have an open source Canary, Open Canary, and with the tokens, yeah, I think you can, but I've never tried it. I don't know what all is involved
Right.
there. But yeah, I mean, it's not super sophisticated stuff. It's like the reason you pay for Thinkst is you want to deploy 1 million of these things across your
Yes.
infrastructure using their API, right? You don't want to have to do all that by hand.
Yeah, and you want something low interaction too, which is much safer.
Yeah, low interaction, you're wasting. I just think you're wasting a whole lot of time when you go high interaction. Like it's a lot of setup time, it's a lot of work, and every company I run into, they're like, I don't want to study the attacker's behavior. I just want them gone. I just want to keep them out.
You want to leave that to us, cybersecurity companies,
Exactly.
right? We'll do the honeypot stuff. I mean, most cybersecurity companies today, they're doing any kind of research, either partner or have some their own honeypots to observe attacker behavior. Look, quite frankly, it's the best way to get threat intelligence because I don't have to rely on third-party sources. If I have my own honeypot system, I can just observe attacker behavior and then I can report things. Then I can write detections for it. To me, it's one of the most accurate. It is the most accurate source of threat intelligence.
Yeah, well, one of fun ideas that I have in my brain also, like as a defender, if you are defending an SSL VPN appliance, what you can make is a fake VPN connection into a fake network and deploy like 5-10 devices inside a fake network named like CEO laptops, like the C-suite laptops or whatever, and just let attacker go in there and start trying to interact with those devices. Oh, hey, somebody's interacting with all of that network.
I
Suddenly,
saw
if you
that
have an
with
alert that
Arcane Door. Yep. The post exploitation, it makes so much sense, right? Like you can read the high level news and they'll tell you like roughly what the threat actors do, but I love digging down into the details. What I found with Arcane Door is, well, since the attackers have access to your firewall VPN device, they're just going to look at all the interfaces on it, enumerate the interfaces. That gives them all the subnets that it can connect to and VLANs that it can connect to. then they're just initiating scans. Inside their malware, they have scanners, and the scanners are running based off what is collected from the actual device. And they're like, oh, great, you have this subnet. And I enumerated all these Windows hosts on that subnet. And then I sniffed some credentials, or I hooked even better. This is my favorite one. They hook the authentication process in the underlying Linux of the SSL VPN device, and they just write the passwords to clear text. And now it doesn't happen on every platform, but certain platforms, they were able to actually hook that auth process, and they're just writing it in clear text to a file, and then just exfiltrating that file, and then running the next stage of attack with credentials, with knowledge of what's on where your mapping of your internal network.
You could even do it easier
Yup.
than that. You could just ship it off, and you could skip writing to the local file system entirely, and just 500 UDP. What is syslog? You could just
Yeah.
syslog it across the internet to some syslog server you're running in real
Yeah.
time.
In fact, when we talk about Arcane Door specifically, I get confused if it's line dancer or line runner, but one of them is a first stage. So there's a early stage payload that then drops the second stage payload. The second stage payload is an in-memory resident piece of malware that gives you all that collection of passwords, credentials, but then they also infect the bootloader for persistence as well, for extra measure. But the initial payload, the initial malware implant is in memory.
Yeah. So one thing I think we should mention is that though this sounds like really really tough, with the number is 70% of exploited vulnerabilities were exploited as 0 days.
That's
So
crazy.
now your patch vulnerability management is only concerned with 30% of the problem,
Yeah.
right? But when you look at all these vulnerabilities, so the other part of my research is going back in time and saying, okay, let's make a list of all the vulnerabilities that caused any damages in previous years. What does that list look like? And it's an extremely short list. It's like a couple hundred vulnerabilities
Yep.
that were actually exploited and used in attacks and resulted in, ransomware, some kind of damages. So, and then when you look even further at those couple hundred vulnerabilities, again, something like over half of them are in edge devices. And
Yep.
then the rest are, something I can use to get an info stealer installed, something in a browser, something, web attacks. There's a lot of, web-based products out there that get exploited, where I can get into an email system, a web-based email system or something like that. But once you actually start looking at these, you see the patterns, and you're like, oh, maybe I should just get rid of really old legacy products that are not well maintained anymore, and a big chunk of my problem goes away.
Yeah, but they're also exploiting newer stuff too. So when I prep to do like a demo, so I've been doing a lot of attack demos lately. So I'll look at the Fortinet, and then I will pick a specific product. And I'm not picking on Fortinet. We just did a Fortinet demo, so it's fresh at the top of my mind. So I took FortiOS or FortiGate firewalls as the product, and then I said, okay, in the past, like, I don't want to go anywhere before 2024, right? Like, that's probably the oldest I want to talk about. So I'm like, in the past couple of years, what are the exploits or vulnerabilities that have been exploited, right? So, and it's not necessarily the most critical. I actually wrote a tool that I hope to release that helps me enumerate this data. So I go through and I find the CVEs, and then once I find the CVEs, then I look at which threat actor campaigns have used those CVEs, and then I start to paint the picture together. And like for Fortinet, I came up with 6 recent, I think from 2024 till today. I think I want to say 4 of which were buffer overflows, and 2 were authentication bypasses. The authentication bypass is very new, and you can tie them all back to specific threat actor campaigns. But again, that's 6 out of, even in the past couple of years, there's hundreds, right, that have been released for all Fortinet products, but at least for FortiGate, there were 6.
Yeah, and in this case, we also have to attackers don't really want to exploit complicated vulnerabilities if they have a plain auth bypass with one.
Yep.
It's gonna be a lot easier to build your information gathering from that than from some mega complicated like 5 vulnerability chain which give you access into Windows machine, which then has antivirus you have to bypass. Like we're all hackers, all of them are bypassable, but that's still extra time. If you can get all of that by just one curl and not worry about antivirus at all, why wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely another reason they're targeting these platforms. Is we don't have
So
that I've talked about it last year. I started talking about how we deploy Windows systems and we harden them and we put extra software on them like EDR and vulnerability management agents, and we don't have that for these network edge devices. Adrian, you got some
This is
data on
old.
Fortinet.
Yeah, this is an old copy of CISA Kev, but as of I think maybe 8 months ago, I already had it downloaded, so that's why I
Yeah,
just pulled it up. But yeah, this is just an overview of as of like 8 months ago. This is everything in CISA Kev on Fortinet.
right. And it's interesting how the older vulnerabilities will end up on there. And one of my theories as to why attackers will hang on to older exploits and still use them, because they're valid, obviously. But I think the reason that they're valid is, in order to get the latest firmware or software updates for pretty much any of these network edge devices, is you need a support contract. So you have to pay the vendor to get these software and firmware updates for these appliances. And I think a lot of organizations, especially smaller ones, or ones that are working on their budget or have a constrained budget, they will not update the firmware because they don't have a support contract, so they can't put the latest firmware on it. And it's tempting, because I know firsthand, you can go to eBay and buy these devices really cheap and they work just fine. They work
Yeah.
great. I mean, these devices are awesome at what they do. Even the older ones have a lot of capability and a lot of capacity on them, but you need that support contract. And I think a lot of people are just either like, oh, I need to update these and I have to pay, but my support contract expired. So now I have to go to procurement and I have to get approval for it. And I'm waiting in that process. Or maybe I'm just deploying it to my smaller sites that are around, and it runs what it runs. And I haven't put a support contract on it. So I can't upgrade the firmware on it, which is crazy. I think that's how we end up with all these exposed to the internet. I think
Yep.
that's most of the use cases out there.
That makes
yep.
sense. People being told do more with less.
Mhm.
IT directors being told you're not getting any
Yep.
more budget. Yeah, they're going to make it happen.
Yeah. So obviously you need to keep up with the latest firmware. And if you have these devices, and if you got to have the latest firmware, you got to have it under a support contract. If you can't do that, you might want to go consider alternatives that use open source, right? You might be in a better position to do that, rather than
Yep.
you don't want to run older vulnerable firmware in these devices, because if you are, you're probably already owned, quite frankly. If you're exposing it to the internet,
And
you're probably already owned.
don't put the management interface on the public internet.
Yeah, the problem is with the ones in the SSL VPN service itself that
Yeah,
has to be
that is
exposed to the internet,
for
which
it
is
to work.
why I love the Tailscale model, because Tailscale is just WireGuard under the covers, in that you
Yep.
don't have to expose a port to the internet. The connections are initiated from inside the network to, what do they call those, relay, like a relay server instance in the cloud. But Tailscale has been
Yeah.
making it available so you can run those on your
And you
own
can
now.
you can run that yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't
Yeah.
have to depend on any of their infrastructure. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. The problem with relay servers run by Tailscale themselves is that
right.
they're run by a third party. So now that you can actually deploy one of those yourselves, that's great. It's not like there is a problem with like, oh hey, extra latency. So depending on what exact 2 points you are trying to connect, you have to be very careful about where the hell you put that relay server.
Mm-hmm.
But
So I've deployed this on my network. I was using it from airplane Wi-Fi while on an airplane, and I was able to use Rust Desk is what I'm using to get the GUI of some of my systems at home, and it was like sitting right in front of it.
How do
It
you
was
like
it
how do
was
you
it
like
was great.
Rust Desk? Do you use the open source version of it, or do you pay them?
No, no, I think it's the open source version, and I did a bunch of research. I think it might have
Yeah.
been Network Chuck that I
Yeah.
eventually found. He was recommending it out
Okay.
of a bunch of different options, and yeah, I love it on my iPad,
And
on
now,
an
do you run
airplane.
the Rust Desk server? You can run that locally. You don't have to run it on their cloud. That's another thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. What I'm using Tailscale to get to my network, and
Hmm.
then I'm just Rust Desk to Rust Desk,
Yeah.
just
So
client
your
to
own.
server.
So, but your own Tailscale infrastructure and your own Rust Desk
Yep.
infrastructure.
Yep.
Good for you. I'm lazy. I just used it. I spun up the Tailscale cloud free one a while ago, and I haven't gone and done my own yet, but sounds like I need to. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So, because you can also, the nice part, what I like about the personal version of Tailscale, anyway, somewhat of a slight departure from our conversation, but is you can have routing servers. Is that what they call them? What do they call it? It's like a routing thing. So like you can have one device on your local network that shares its routing table. So if when you connect to your Tailscale, you can access that subnet as if you were on that subnet. Um, and so when I had the studio network up and running, I had a Tailscale. I actually put it on my OpenSense firewall, and it would advertise the route to my studio network. So I'd sit at home and connect to remote desktops and SSH into things just if I was sitting on the same local network as the studio, which was awesome. Then you can configure an exit node, right? So you can configure one of your nodes that will share its internet access. So when you connect to the Tailscale, if you enable the exit node, all of your internet traffic will go over your Tailscale and then out whatever exit node you designate in Tailscale. So you can use it like a more traditional VPN. I had to get around some restrictions. I was actually at a soccer event, and the
Hmm.
local place was filtering like cybersecurity and hacking sites. Like I need to get to these sites, and so I used Tailscale, and it worked great. And that's the free tier. I can't believe they still give that away for free. So I think one of my recommendations beyond updating your firmware is to consider these technologies. And I'm sure there's got to be other alternatives to Tailscale. Adrian, I know you're very close
Yeah.
to the vendors
Zero
for this
tier
today. Yeah, okay.
is another good one.
Hmm.
I've used zero tier before. Those are the two main ones that I've used. I can't give you a list beyond those two.
Yeah,
Somewhere I've got a complete list of them. But yeah, just like the we were talking about the OPNs or
yeah.
the VPN mostly being open VPN, but under the covers. I think most of these you find WireGuard
Yes.
at the core.
Right.
And I threw in the chat there Tailscale's blog that has all the diagrams and explains how this works.
Yeah, it's you got to do a little reading on it to get up to speed on it, but then once you get it deployed, I think it runs really well. Although I haven't done a local deployment. It sounds like you have, Adrian, which is cool.
Yep, building up uh, the local lab at home.
Yes. Building labs could be a whole episode we dedicate to that.
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
working on building one too, and I'm trying to design so that I can have virtual systems in addition to physical systems all in the same lab space, but also having to protect that, right? Because if you want to run vulnerable on purpose stuff in that environment, you have to make sure you segment it from the rest of your network. But you also need access to it. So, and you can treat it carefully because it's vulnerable stuff. Again, you don't want to expose it to the internet.
Yep.
So I don't know. I somewhat predict a shift, especially after reading the Avanti article and seeing how the security posture of these devices is now more and more starting to drive decisions for purchasing and technology selection. But a huge, in those listening before you get all up in arms, I understand it's not easy to switch platforms, right? Especially if
I
you've got
mean,
a large deployment of whatever your technology is. I mean, we mentioned a whole bunch of vendors in there. If you've already got a deployment of that, it's a lot of work because you have to touch every user, right? And we've all worked in IT. That's hard.
so Ivanti's not doing great. By February 2025, they had lost a third of their customers, but they still have 2/3.
Right.
Right? That's the thing that's amazing to me. We've got the U.S. government, EU, telling people stop using these products,
Yep.
and they just went from 50,000 customers to 34,000 customers, which they're not doing great. They don't have a lot of cash reserves. They're piling on more debt,
They have
but
something like $2.5 billion of debt on the books.
yeah,
And
over three, I think at this point.
is it over 3 at this point? And forget
3
what
billion,
their annual revenue is projected to be.
not enough.
Not enough to cover the debt, right? Which is, I'm like, oh my God. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
3.1 billion is their total debt.
Wow. Wow. Um,
Yeah, that's going
you
to be an
mentioned
issue.
the EU. One thing I like about the EU is they adopt open source. In fact, I think it was even certain countries like governments, France, Denmark, I've seen articles where they're leaving commercial products to go towards open source. So I appreciate the EU for going towards open source. Now, it's a double-edged sword, right? You might have a little more maintenance to do and a little more work to get things implemented and keep things running. But the advantage is if it's open source, you have access to that layer to do the monitoring, right? If you're running a pfSense, OpenSense, or
Right.
any in even I saw a
But you
couple of
need
other like
people who know what they're
alternatives.
doing.
Yes, yes, but I think that's the more of the culture in the EU is they're more attuned with open source. I think they always have been, right? That's just been something in the culture in a lot of those countries. They adopt and
Yeah,
use open source more so than the U.S.
I think the whole idea behind open source. I mean that's why Linux came out of Finland, right?
Yes,
You
yes,
know, like you see a lot of this stuff come out of Sweden and Finland. Is it's just it jives with the mindset there.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Everything isn't profit driven.
Yeah. One other thing, on a slightly different topic, I did see a Trail of Bits article that released a tool that allows you to do memory forensics, without published symbol tables, because
Yeah,
that
that
can
was
be
really cool.
frustrating, right? It also was kind of similar to like when you develop exploits. Like, I need the binary to reverse engineer the binary to understand how it works in the memory mapping in order to build a ROP chain that can produce a successful exploit. And I believe memory forensics is kind of similar, right? To pull apart the memory, you need the symbol table in order to do that. Except Trail of Bits has this tool that they open sourced that eliminates that dependency entirely, is what the article says. It says it analyzes Linux memory dumps without requiring external debug information.
Hmm.
Like that's pretty awesome. I mean, that's
Yeah,
Wow.
and so I sent this immediately to our product research team, and I think other product research teams should be looking at it for the same reasons. If now we can integrate it into
This
our
is
product more easily, right? An open source tool to analyze. If we can get a memory dump from a system, now we don't have to worry about what specific kernel and symbol tables it's using.
this is a game changer for edge devices because in many cases you only have a compiled
yeah.
kernel and
Right.
no information about like what it was compiled from, no debug symbols, nothing like that. Good luck if it is like some random ARM32 architecture, if like this approach works in more than just x86, this is even more amazing because
Yep.
suddenly all of these devices become analyzable.
And not just that is it provides the interface for analyzing the dump as well. They say they were inspired by OS query, but they give you basically like an interactive SQL interface for
To
exploring the
query it.
dump.
Right.
Mhm.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I think it's one of there's a lot of new
We
tools
we don't
released.
deserve Trail of Bits.
I know, right? They do great work at Trail of Bits. There's a lot of tools released every week. This one definitely, caught my eye. It's interesting how AI has kind of shaped the tools in some of the articles. I've noticed a trend that when I see an article on Medium now, 90+% of the time it's AI generated, and it's not very useful
Really?
content anymore. Yeah, I used to get some really good Medium articles that just did a great job of explaining things. It seems to have transitioned over the past couple of years now to it's AI slop. Like almost every
They-
article that gets slapped up on Medium is AI slop.
Yeah, there's so a lot of companies are having to pivot because of that. Like people almost like a huge swath of people just stopped using Pinterest because it got flooded
Yep.
with AI images.
Yep.
And so a lot of these companies are now trying to build filters to
Mhm.
detect and filter out AI stuff.
Yep. And the users kind of police it too. So I follow a lot of Reddit threads, and Reddit is great for a lot of things. One is fleshing out some of this AI slop. So I'll see the headline because I am my RSS reader. I subscribe to, that's how I read Reddit, right? And I'm like, oh, that sounds really like a really cool tool. And then I'll go to the Reddit thread, and the moderator has already removed it, and people have made comments that was AI slop. And I'm like, great, you saved me the time from having to go look at that
Exactly.
tool and come to the same conclusion myself, right? But some of the AI coded projects are really good. In fact, we covered a stat that 4% of commits are Claude in GitHub right now, and that number is expected to rise to 26%. And Claude's gotten it gets better every day at writing code and doing projects. So if you're prompting it correctly, you can get a really good project out of it. In fact, I've got a couple. In fact, my Linux hacks, I do want to, if you go to my GitHub, P Asadoorian. So github.com, P Asadoorian. I just put up a repository called Linux Hacks. And it's very much like the traditional way we've done technical segments over in podcasts in years past is I've got problems that I need to solve, like for me, and I might write a script for that. And then with AI technology, I've taken those scripts and I'll have Claude go through them and pretty them up and error check them and add error checking. And then I released many of them on that GitHub repository called Linux_hacks. And one of them was a little AI coding thing that I did. So our listeners may remember, if you follow Eclipsium, I've produced supply chain cheat sheets for Windows, Android, and Linux. Windows, Android, and Linux. And it basically gives you a bunch of commands and utilities that you can use to query your device and your operating system for the hardware that it's using and the configuration. For example, do you have a TPM? What version of TPM is it? If it's an actual TPM hardware, what chip is it? And there's commands you can do to query the system for that. And so what I did was I told Claude, I'm like, hey, based on my Linux cheat sheets document, go create a shell script that implements everything in that cheat sheet. And it did it, and it actually works really great. So if you want a kind of a taste for our philosophy in looking at your systems and understanding both the hardware and the firmware and the configuration as it relates to what's in your system for hardware and firmware, that script is a great starting point for you. And that's all free open source on my GitHub.
Nice.
I was actually kind of impressed. I ran the script. I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. That gives you a lot of great information. Now you have to do all the manual work. Like if it tells you you're running a BIOS, you have to go say, is that the latest BIOS, and go apply your BIOS update. But it also tells you about microcode vulnerabilities that might exist in your CPU. And there's a couple of ways to query those, right? And you can use Linux to update your microcode, or that might come from your BIOS update. So it's a pretty cool script to kind of flesh out some of the issues that we're working on here at Eclipsium. That will bring us to time. Adrian, thanks for appearing on the show this week. Vlad, thank you as always. Thanks everyone for listening and watching this edition of Below the Surface. We'll see you next time. Over and out.
Bye bye.